morning, everyone. My name is Alina Kang, and I'm a senior accounting and political science double major pursuing a certificate in business fundamentals. This is my third year planning the Women in Business Conference and fourth year attending. As one of the co-chairs of the Women in Business Committee, I'm honored to be here today to welcome you to our 17th annual conference. It has been a wonderful experience growing our Women in Business community and working with our committee members over the past 4 years to bring yet another inspiring day to you all. Thank you for being here to contribute to the exciting conversations that will be had throughout the day. At this time, I would like to introduce Professor Nancy Andrews, who will serve as the moderator for our keynote interview today. Professor Andrews is an associate professor in the classics department, specializing in gender, sexuality, and women's studies and peace and conflict studies. She received her PhD in classical philology from Harvard University. Along with teaching, Professor Andrews has also served as the Montserrat Director, which comprises supporting the first-year Montserrat program and experience. Now I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, who's actually a student of Professor Andrews during her time at Holy Cross, Erin Robert, class of 2006, as Managing Director and Head of Impact Finance at JPMorgan Chase. Erin is responsible for leading the JPMorgan Chase's Impact Finance team, which utilizes financial products to advance strategic drivers of inclusive growth. She shares, through our Impact Finance team, JPMorgan Chase is able to expand the tools it uses to drive change beyond traditional philanthropy. This effort enables us to bring the full resources of the firm to bear, including our lending and investing expertise, to address some of the most pressing challenges society faces today. Prior to entering this role last year, Erin has served in several positions over the years at JPMorgan, including global commodities and commodity finance. At her time at Holy Cross, she participated in the Washington Semester Program in spring of 2005 and interned at the White House under the National Economic Council. She was inducted to Phi Beta Kappa, Pi Sigma Alpha, and Omicron Delta Epsilon, 3 notable and well-accomplished societies at Holy Cross. She graduated magna cum laude with a bachelor's degree in economics and political science. At the end of the keynote, we will have a mic in the front of the room for an open Q&A session. Now I will turn the floor over to Professor Andrews and Erin.
Can you hear us like that, or should I hold the mic up to my? Can you hear us? Okay, great. I'll start off, but first I want to reply to Professor Inman about her observations of Holy Cross, because I came here. My undergraduate training was at Wellesley College, so I was used to an all-female environment. And then, of course, I was at graduate school at Harvard, where I got the co-ed experiences. And I just wanted to say a couple things. Father Brooks made the statement, I guess, that admitting women to Holy Cross was the best decision he ever made as president of the college. So I just wanted to follow up on one thing that she said. And I also want to tell you about my first experience at Holy Cross coming into the classics department. I came here and interviewed for the job at the suggestion of a Holy Cross student whom I was teaching as a graduate student at Ohio State, which was my first job. And she came into my office and closed the door and she said, "I think you should apply for this job. I think you'd love Holy Cross." And that's very true. I'm going on my 27th year here, but I have to tell you, my first introduction to teaching here was a bit startling. So I walked into a Latin classroom, advanced Latin, and there were all men sitting around the table. And the women were all sitting on the margins of the room. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to change that. And I think my mentorship of women in the department and in the college has succeeded in doing that. So Erin Roberts and I met. I had just gotten tenure and I had spent a sabbatical in Italy, and I came back and the college wanted me to do the college honors program. So I met Erin immediately in a college honors interview in 2003. Seems like a long time ago. And obviously she impressed me enough to admit her to the college honors program. And so we knew each other over the course of 3 years. And I don't know why this is, but Erin particularly struck me, and we struck up a friendship right away. And there were a couple other people who are still on campus who were part of that friendship. One is Father Tim O'Brien, who's become a Jesuit, and another one is Dan Riccardi, who's an associate vice president for investments. So we became friends right away, and they gave me a lot of mentoring in the honors program. I was nervous about running it. Dan tells me now he didn't notice a thing, but I really sort of clung to them for support. So we're just going to have a conversation here and talk about essentially how that experience in honors and how many of Erin's other experiences at Holy Cross have really kind of shaped her career as she's moved on over the last almost 20 years. So
You didn't need to say that.
what? I'm sorry. After a while, you don't notice anymore.
Multiple decades. Oh, no.
So do you want to start out just telling us a little bit about how you came to Holy Cross, and then how you developed at Holy Cross and how it turned out to be a major kind of experience for you?
I'm happy to. And first, I just want to say thank you all so much for having me. It's such an honor to be here. In particular, Cassie, Alina, and the whole team, all the seniors in the room. I just want to acknowledge that senior ball was last night. So kudos to you guys for being here. I'm not sure I would have been able to do it. So huge props for that. And to be here, at the 50th anniversary of coeducation makes this particular event really special, especially when it's one that I attended my senior year. So this is just really special for me. So thank you all for having me. So Holy Cross, boy, clearly an institution that's brought us all together, but one that's been so formative for me. So my father actually is an alum himself, class of 77. I think Paul's probably watching. So hi, Paul. And my mom, my sister's class of 2004. So much like Dr. Inman, I had not, it was not new to me to, walk up the hill, and I kind of knew what I was getting into from a, calf and burn perspective, knowing I'd be coming up and down the hill. So for me, there were a couple things that really appealed to me about the college when I came to visit. Chief among them was the Washington semester program. I got pretty tactical early on. I knew that I wanted to, have a different type of academic experience. And knowing that Holy Cross had a number of immersive programs like the Washington semester program, like the significant number of study abroad programs, I knew that I would be able to find, a few different types of programs that could appeal to me. And then look, the Holy Cross's reputation as an academic powerhouse preceded itself. And so having had a great experience in my high school and really creating a community of collaboration and learning, I wanted to continue that. And then finally, for me, I'm Catholic, and I had never attended a Catholic institution before. And so for me, that was actually something that was quite appealing. I had never been part of a place where you could blend a community of faith and a community of learning. And so collectively, those are really the big things that prompted me to consider Holy Cross.
Believe it or not, that was true for me as a faculty member too. I was kind of wondering what it would be like to be in a Catholic institution. Then once I met the Jesuits and made friends with a lot of them, it changed my whole perspective, I think. So do you want to talk to people, because I'm sure they're curious about this, about what you majored in and how that has influenced things?
Absolutely. So one of the questions that I get most frequently when folks want to, come into finance and they're, discerning what their major is going to be, do I have to be a finance major? Do I need to be a business major? Because, we work with folks from across the country, across the world. The answer is no, first. So we actually love hiring folks with liberal arts backgrounds. Why? A, because you're taught how to think. Like, we can teach you the tools that you need on the job. But we want to make sure that you're, someone who's going to be curious, who's going to engage in the material. And I think for some of my colleagues who've been out, a few years, it's something we recognize in the folks that we're looking to hire. It brings that curiosity. And the Jesuit concept of, being a whole person, being able to interact with people at multiple levels. When you're sitting next to someone for 14 hours a day, you want to know a little something about them, and that you want to be able to work with them in a way that's, not just interacting over an Excel spreadsheet, which also happens. But so for me, I'm a policy geek. I've always been a policy geek. So I was a political science major, focused primarily on American government. So for me, it was just wonderful to spend a lot of time with the political science department. But I also knew that I was interested in business. So I wanted to, figure out a way to kind of combine those two things. So I also, I then double majored in econ. So that actually gave me a nice little balance of, everything ranging from political philosophy to econ 101 to econometrics, to really give me that well-rounded version of the world. Which, when I was thinking about this, I was like, okay, well, this will give me a variety of options when I think about, how I am personally going to go set the world on fire, right? And so combining those two things was the way that I was like, all right, I can do this in a way that's really appealing to me intellectually, but I can also use as I think about what my career is going to look like.
Yeah. So I'm just curious, did you declare a double major early on, or was the econ something that was kind of an add-on maybe after you went to Washington?
Yeah, so I did both early on. This may surprise you or not surprise you. I'm a planner, a little bit of a planner. I'm a little OCD. My mom and sister are smirking because they know I just created an inventory of my pantry that automatically creates a shopping list. So not going to surprise anybody. So for me, I had looked at what the different course offerings were and really wanted to, come up with something that really, resonated with me, something that was going to get me excited to take an 8 a.m. class, because at that point in my life, I was not on the 5 a.m. brigade. And that, I think, when you get super tactical and when you think about like, who are the professors that I want to, get exposure to, but also who are the people I want to learn with? And I see one of my classmates, Meg Fraser, is here. And we were in the first year program together, which was the precursor to Montserrat. And that created this wonderful, like, living, learning experience where, you were really experiencing something unique together as classmates. And that was something that I actually pretty intentionally did throughout my time at Holy Cross. As Father Tim O'Brien, as Professor Andrews mentioned, he and I actually, did a seminar together. We curated different classes where we would, find classes to take with one another. And there's a, long list of folks who we would do that with. Why? Because it created a community. And that was a really interesting way to learn. And we can come back to this a bit more when I talk about my time at JPMorgan. But that creates something that is that was, I think, unique about Holy Cross, unique about this community, but really sets the stage for a really special group of people who you will find in the wild once you graduate.
Yeah. So I was reading some old emails from Tim, because he used to write to me and drop by my office all the time. And he did a constitutional law thesis. Now, were you in a seminar with Karen Dubanoff together? She has retired, but she was famous for teaching constitutional law.
So we took Con Law 1 and 2 together. And so that's a great example of when you can learn from, well, obviously a wonderful professor, Karen Dubanoff, incredible, but also your peers. So Tim and I would actually read each other's papers and provide some feedback. And the first time we did it, damned if that guy didn't use actual citations in a way that I was like, oh, I'm not doing that. And then I was like, oh, I should do that. And as a result, I learned how to do it, which, theoretically could have set us both up for law school. Neither one of us took that path. But that I think is an example of where good ideas come from your peers, your professors, and that's where creating that community is so important. And I actually want to point one thing out about what you said. The faculty here are very special, and this is, in particular for the juniors and below. If you're not taking advantage of office hours, of that openness to that collaboration, you're doing it wrong. Like, this isn't about just taking classes. It's really engaging with the material and your professors in a way that, man, you don't have, some of you go on to grad school and things like that, but you don't have that time any other time in your life. And so it's really special to have that created here in, this finite 4-year period.
That's very interesting. Well, you'd be interested to know that the Montserrat program has really changed even more the relationship between student and professor. And I think because these students do a small seminar at the very beginning, and they also are living in the same residence halls, they are much less shy about coming and talking to professors. But I must say the pandemic has affected that. And this is the first semester since the pandemic that I think we're even on the way to normal with students dropping by in yesterday. So I was in my office yesterday and I had so many students drop by and ask to make appointments. I couldn't believe it, but I was exhausted at the end, but I was really happy that, we are getting back to normal in that respect. I want to ask you something else, backing up about majors. So you were a political science major, an econ major. And some people might say, well, that's pretty typical for going into finance or the area that you've gone into. What about English and history majors and classics majors, if I dare say?
Yeah, I think particularly for both the breadth of jobs in, business loosely defined within finance as well, effective communication is so key to success in these jobs, even if you're in a position that is quite heavily quantitative. And I think it's something that's really underestimated when we're preparing students for these jobs. The ability to reach the audience that you're trying to reach in a way that resonates with them is something I think actually liberal arts institutions curate in a way that if you are, finance major at Penn, you'll get some of that, but, we want you to be able to engage with the material and be curious. There's a line from Ted Lasso. I'm a huge Ted Lasso fan. If anybody else is, be curious, not judgmental. That is one of the biggest things that I try to hire for. I want to hire people who, even if they don't have a background in finance or, quantitative background, they are interested in learning why. If you see something that doesn't look right and you don't know why it doesn't look right, are you going to ask the next question? And English major, history major, classics major, that is how you engage with the material. When you're, learning how to conjugate Spanish verbs, right? When you're, the gamut of material is so wide, right? Ultimately, it's, are you curious?
There used to be a keynote speaker who came here a couple of years in a row, I think. She was an English major, and she was a vice president at Fidelity, and she said her English major helped her more than anything, and all the writing she did in terms of being successful at Fidelity. And as Erin was saying, those communication skills are just so important, and personal interaction. I find now, I'm teaching in Montserrat right now, but I find urging the students to develop verbal skills and develop writing skills is those are the two most important things that I think that we do at the beginning of Holy Cross, and then students really take off from there.
And actually, if I can even jump in on that, that's where what you do in your time at Holy Cross can also complement, your major. And so for me, I'm both a policy nerd and just a generic nerd. So I did both mock trial, moot court, and student government, and things that I took from those activities. Got over my fear of public speaking. Still not as articulate as I want to be, but the ability to develop a cohesive argument and guide it into succinct bullet points. That's a skill I use every day. And into student government, a lot of the interactions with the administration of Holy Cross with my fellow students, that really provided me the perspective of, I was co-chair with Carrie Hoffman, who's a class below me, really developed my ability to negotiate disparate and sometimes offsetting needs, right? Where the college had an opinion on something and students held the opposite opinion. Well, what could we navigate to get to a decent spot or a compromise? And to do that in an environment that encouraged student input was so valuable, and a little bit of training ground for JPMorgan, for the private sector. It's really, there's nothing new under the sun. So what you're doing here these are skills that you are literally going to copy paste and use, post graduation. For my peers, who've been out of school for a bit, I think the smiles and nods, right? We've all seen it.
I just want to reiterate what Erin just said. In first year, I've already had people from mock trial and moot court, and now there's a new mediation group of people. It's very competitive, and Holy Cross does very well nationally. And I would agree absolutely with Erin that the students that do that develop some of the best speaking skills of students at Holy Cross. So if you haven't thought about it, think about doing it. And the students that join it just love it. So one of my students from Montserrat joined immediately after I brought a sophomore in from Montserrat, and she's just hugely enjoying it. And I've seen a big change in her, even in the course of a semester, in terms of her speaking skills and so forth. So do you want to address at all what you felt it was like being a woman at Holy Cross when you were here, and any knowledge from that you've taken on to JPMorgan? So, because I think we should start talking about that.
Absolutely. So this is really where I want to acknowledge that the work of those who went before me paved the way for what was a very normal experience. By the time I had arrived at Holy Cross, we were actually over 50% women. And so it did not feel to me any different from my co-ed high school or anything to that effect. And that I just want to underscore, when I was applying for roles in finance, it was still very much a question on, do you really want to be a woman in finance? I mean, there's that, sometimes like, I didn't have that experience at Holy Cross, but what that also did is it did not make me fully appreciate all of the work that had been done, already on Wall Street, to make that an easier path for people my age. And that is something that, particularly now that I've been, been at the firm for 16 years, I see both the work that's been done in the time that I joined, but the tremendous amount of work that went before me. And for the women who endured not great circumstances where sexism was overt and in a way that was hostile. And I think what was overt pivoted to, something that was even, as sinister, but more of a subtext. And I think we're slowly working out of that. But walking into that, you only see what is true today. And it's really easy not to remember what it was like not so long ago. And I actually had the pleasure of meeting Nalani Ramos, who's one of the student representatives on the Board of Trustees, class of 21. And we were just talking about how, 50 years is not a long time for coeducation. Women got the right to vote in this country 100 years ago. It takes decades and decades and generations to work out the systemic inequities that that type of discrimination creates. And so while so much work has been done, more is needed. And I'm pleased that I've been able to use my career in a way to tackle some of these systemic issues, if only in a small way, whether it's racism, sexism, and broader systemic injustices.
That's interesting. I'm sure that I could tell some of the same kinds of stories that Beth referred to about the beginning of my career. I'm sure we all have our stories in this age group. But I'll tell you where I really see the difference at Holy Cross, because things have changed quite a bit. And that is in the male students. And I'm teaching in Montserrat right now, as I told you, and I have a number of male students who are very sensitive, very articulate. I'm not saying that men weren't like that when I first came, but it was a different atmosphere where boys would have come all from Jesuit boys' high schools, and that had its effects in terms of their interactions with women. Now, whether these students have attended boys' schools or not, they're just different. And I attribute a lot of the difference to their parents' relationships, which have really changed, and to the kind of mothering that boys have experienced. I mean, I have people come into my office all the time and talk to me about, oh, my mom is, an editor here, or my mom has told me that. These kinds of things from working in her job as a doctor. There are lots of parents who are both doctors. But I think things have changed a lot in our society, and it really is having an impact on both males and females in their relationships. So how did you get to the place that you're in? How did you get your first job?
Well, I need to shout out the Center for Career Development because it's 100% attributed to them. My junior spring, I got an email from them that was like, do you want to work on Wall Street this summer? And it's like, I don't know, maybe. And 20 years ago, you didn't have to think much more in advance than junior year, thankfully. I routinely joke that I would not have been hired today, just as an aside. And I actually ended up interning at Lehman Brothers, which is dating me. We all know what happened during the financial crisis. And I interned on a research desk focused on munis. And I had just come off of Washington semester where I had a great internship, as Alina mentioned, at the White House, focused on policy and policy reform. And I felt as though, my skill sets were leveraged. I had more responsibility than I probably should have, and also made a lot of copies. So still really good at that, just saying. And I think in contrast, and just great team, I think in contrast to that, and I feel comfortable saying this since the firm doesn't exist anymore, the culture of the firm was great, in all honesty, but my direct team was not as kind of engaging. And I was very frustrated. I felt like I could have done more in the internship, and my skills weren't being leveraged as much. And so, as my mom probably dealt with more kind of incoming phone calls, like, this is miserable. And so by the end of the summer, I'd gotten an offer, but I was like, I don't know if this is what I want to do. And if you had asked me at that point in time, I would have told you I wasted 8 weeks of my life. Like, why did I do that? That's silly. My time wasn't well sorted. What it did is it gave me the experience that set me up for a good bit of luck. And, I spent senior kind of figuring out what I wanted to do. And, I had a couple offers that weren't interesting, but I got a note from Amy Murphy, and my senior spring that said JPMorgan was hiring an analyst in Muni, in investment banking focused on munis. Lo and behold, I'd done an internship in munis. It was Kismet. And so I went to New York. I interviewed one of the courses I had just taken on financial markets and institution. Thank God the bond math that we did longhand came up in my interview, and I was able to answer the question. And that's how I got the job. And so it was really, frankly, like a collection of, Holy Cross Kismet. And it was a Holy Cross grad who was running the group at the time, who had reached out. But I think, preparation prepared me for that very fortunate series of events.
I wanted to emphasize how important alumni relationships are. I'm constantly telling students in my office, I have no business doing this because I haven't worked in business, but I tell people constantly to look up an area that you're interested in and find out about alumni and alumni who are in those areas, and to at least call people to ask for help. I've never seen a student call a Holy Cross alumna or alumnus and be turned away. People are very eager to talk to you. And even if that person doesn't end up hiring you, they have your name and they have a memory of you, and they may just say something to a friend of theirs. And that's how most people really end up getting jobs, I think.
I think just the ability to learn from alums who are generous with their time. So Morgan Kennedy, who worked at Morgan Stanley, was so generous with me and kind of walked me through the work that he did. And that generosity really, it gave me some more fluency in the space and also gave me something to hold on to. Like, when you're graduating, there are so many different avenues for you to go down. It's tough to narrow down what might be of interest. And so those touch points were so helpful. And then Peter Hill, who is the gentleman who ran the Holy Cross, or who ran the JPMorgan Public Finance Group, he's still on Wall Street, but yet another just great supporter and someone who's so generous, both with with his time, but wanting to ensure that pipeline is created. And I think that was a lesson for me when I arrived at JPMorgan. And I think this is where, looking up, it's wonderful to see examples of women who are in roles that you want to be in, who are in the rooms at the tables that you want to be in. But it's also incumbent on us when we get into those rooms and sit at those tables to recognize that we're there. And the fact that we're all sitting in this room, we're in the room. And so the question now is, what do you do to open the door to the person behind you and to make sure that you're pulling them into? And at JPMorgan, we actually worked closely with Cassie, Professor Chu at the time, to start thinking about what a boot camp might look like for folks on Wall Street who wanted to work on Wall Street. And no one gave us permission at the firm to do that. But a few of us got together and we're like, all right, we could, let's figure out how to do this. And using the roles that we had, and I was junior at the time, I was an associate, really trying to ensure that we were coaching students on campus to give them a pipeline into the firm through traditional channels. I want to emphasize, my compliance person would be yelling at me otherwise, to make sure they understood the process. And so, it's incumbent on us to identify the ways that you can do that, whether you're 5 years out, whether you're a junior, there are different ways that we can do that, and ensuring that you're providing that insight to someone else who is in your shoes 5 years ago is the most important way that we can do that.
I also have had a number of male mentors throughout my life. So I think it's important to remember that it's about the personal relationships that you establish with people. That's very important. You never know if you're going to click with a person or not. But I also want to emphasize, again, what Professor Inman said, the sisterhood matters. I think relationships with other women become increasingly important as you get older. I have all kinds of wonderful colleagues around the campus. And I have to say, I have a special relationship with women who went to women's schools. So I think it's important to think of all kinds of mentors who can help you with all kinds of things. So I want to ask you, so you have this very impressive title, Managing Director and Head of Impact Finance at JPMorgan Chase. And I just wanted to ask you to talk about it a little bit, because I have no idea what that means.
If it makes you feel any better, I don't fully either. And when I explain what we do around the firm, I typically start with that. So our team at JPMorgan actually invests the firm's capital to advance our impact objectives. So what does that mean? Well, we have very large commitments to advance, for example, racial equity. We've committed $30 billion over 5 years to start to unravel, systemic racism that happens in financial markets. We also have a $2.5 trillion, that's not a verbal typo, that's a T, sustainable development target, which again, what does that mean? Well, we've committed trillions of dollars to combat climate change, to focus on sustainable development in emerging markets, and broader community development efforts. So when you boil that down, like what does that look like on the ground? We believe there are really 4 tenets to create inclusive economic growth: affordable housing, access to it, creating access to capital, particularly for Black and Brown entrepreneurs, creating financial health for all of us, and creating jobs that are future-proofed, right? So ensure that folks are prepared for the jobs that will exist in the future. And then, of course, more broadly, sustainability. And so our team does not do that through philanthropy. We do it through debt and equity investments. And so, the way we go about this is, working with counterparties who we know share those same goals and desires. Examples always help for me, so I'll give you a couple. So, for example, we made a $10 million loan to a nonprofit called ROC USA. It's Resident Ownership Capital, and what they do is help the residents of manufactured housing communities. They're sometimes referred to colloquially as mobile home parks. So they help them acquire the land, like under which their mobile homes reside. Why is that important? Well, many of these places are owned by mom and pop landowners, and when they're ready to retire, they need to sell the land. And what we've seen is more traditional institutional capital coming in, buying up the land, and then the residents are kind of beholden to what that institutional buyer is going to do. And so this provides the tenants the ability to acquire the land through long-term, low-cost loans, so that they can be first to the pin, have a right of first refusal to buy that asset. We also invest in private companies that are working with low and middle income communities and creating technology for real problems, not trying to shave another 90 seconds off of your delivery. So there's a company called Propel that has created this technology solution for folks who are on government assistance so that they can actually aggregate their government benefits and see them in one centralized place. The first time I heard of this technology, I was like, well, surely that exists, right? No, it doesn't. Why? Because a lot of the technology that is designed today is not targeted, toward low and middle income consumers. It's targeted at the mass affluent. And that is a great example of, technology that is designed for many people. There are, over 60 million users of food stamps, SNAP benefits annually. That creates dignity to access the benefits that you're eligible for. And so how does that manifest? Well, when you're standing in line at the grocery store, you're able to quickly check an app to make sure that you can afford what's in your cart, as opposed to stepping out of line, calling an 800 number and waiting, through, a bunch of different menu pages to make sure that you've got sufficient cash flow. So those are just 2 examples of transactions that we've done that I'm so proud of, and has been a great way for me to marry the financial background that I have with really, again, the policy nerd, the desire to change, make change at scale and at the system level.
So we had a conference here this semester on hunger, and McGovern came and spoke, but there were some pretty impressive students who had taken gap years and worked on this issue. And I was so shocked at some of the statistics about hunger in this country and in Massachusetts. 26% of people in Massachusetts are food insecure, is the way people talk about it. But I'm thrilled to hear that someone like you is in a position where a lot of people might not think that you care about these issues, but you really do. Do you think your personal background or your experience at Holy Cross, I'm just wondering where this came from?
Well, so I think it's certainly no coincidence that, Holy Cross tries to create men and women for others. And so that, I think, is always something that's been part of me. It's, my parents kind of grounding me in that. And I think being able to work for a company that shares those objectives for me was critical. I don't think I wouldn't be able to work someplace that wasn't, goal aligned with, things that I found important. And that I think is just as we all think about managing our careers and choosing teams and choosing firms, that alignment is really important, particularly when you can use your position, again, recognizing when you're at the table, to influence a big institution where if you move it by this much, the spillover effect is huge. And to have that opportunity, at the world's largest bank, has really been, huge opportunity for me.
Yeah. Can you talk more broadly about how you perceive success and what your general experiences have been like, and how much your Jesuit education, with the emphasis not just on these other values that I've been talking about, but I think on tenacity, how that's helped you kind of perceive your life in retrospect?
It's a great question. I think all of us probably, particularly post-pandemic, post-murder of George Floyd, we're all kind of grappling with priorities and how we spend our time. Knowing that, how you spend your time is who you are. And so some of that comes from, the self-awareness of where you're going to bias. I mean, I'm a hard worker. I will grind. I will continue to grind. And so for me, what that means is I actually have to keep checking my priorities so that I'm not, spending my days in, focused on work, and make sure that I create that space intentionally, to spend time with family, spend time with friends, take the vacation. And so that overall, I think is something that requires ongoing work. It isn't a one and done. And so it's really easy for me, it's easy in a presentation like this to, look at a career and it looks linear. Like it looks like, oh, this was intentional. Okay, Erin, went to Holy Cross and she did this, and then she went to JPMorgan and she got this job. I just have to say, it's not linear. And success is, if I honestly look back at my career, it's a lot of little ups and downs with, slight, slow growth, but it comes from kind of tenacity, resilience, and I think a desire to keep learning. And that to me is something that feeds me. I ask a lot of stupid questions, and that is a privilege, I'd say, but like it shouldn't be. Everyone should feel free to ask the stupid question. But that means that, I keep learning, and lo and behold, people like to answer questions that you ask them. So if you give them the license, you're going to learn a lot.
So I just want to say something because Erin has just reminded me of something that I was reminded about this year by a student who came to Holy Cross. Believe it or not, I was sitting in my office meeting with advisees, and this young woman came in and she was one of my advisees, and she sat down and we chit-chatted, and then finally she just kind of looked at me and she said, "My mother told me that you said something to her once that she has never forgotten." And I said, "Who's your mother?" And it turned out she was a student I had taught when I was first at Holy Cross. Well, I was kind of horrified that I was teaching the daughter of someone that I taught. So it reminded me of time passing. But I asked her, what exactly was it? And she said, "You said to her, women should never apologize." And I said, I say that to my women students all the time. And it's really funny that you should say that. And I was just really happy that someone did remember something that I had said to them. But I want to say the same thing to you. You should never apologize. A lot of women start out saying, "I'm sorry," or, "This is a stupid question." That's actually what kicked this off. You should just be yourself and be proud of who yourself is. I don't find that men start off many conversations by apologizing. So try to keep that in mind.
Amen. And this is why our professors are our Sherpas. And so, some people think of, mentors. I think of the Sherpaship, Professor Andrews, that you provided me, and the ability to kind of shine light on like little pieces that may grow over time, right? So being open to that as well, to let someone show you a part of yourself you may not see. And that was so much of what you gave to me through honors program and the friendship that we developed.
Thank you. Yeah, I think most professors at Holy Cross are that way. They see the potential, they see the light. And I would say we are very tenacious in terms of, hanging in there, maybe waiting for something great to happen and encouraging students. And I have to say, I think I have a special commitment to female students. I mean, I love all my students, but I have a special commitment. I think it's from having gone to a women's college. So,
Yeah, open up to questions.
well, do you want to talk to us and ask us any questions?
Who will be the brave first soul?
Yeah, who's the first one?
I was going to say, don't make a senior do it. They were out too late. So underclassmen, step up.
You might be able to tell by my voice. So first off, thank you guys both so much for being here. It's been great to hear about your experiences in finance and academia. And going off of your conversation about apologizing too much, it made me think about the amount of exclamation marks that I think women use in their emails. And I'd love to hear about your experience, especially right out of college, navigating a male-dominated world, being an ambitious, strong, direct woman without wanting to be perceived as being demanding, if that makes sense.
Great question. And McKenna, good to see you. I'm going to say this into the mic, just McKenna's voice is down. She was picking up on just so folks on Zoom can hear the great question. McKenna's picking up on, not apologizing. And actually, I love a good grammar and punctuation question. That sometimes women use too many exclamation points within email. So, how do you navigate that and navigate being a woman in a male dominated field? I actually think I certainly behaved a bit differently early in my career, where I really tried to blend in. And I think especially working in investment banking, that was particularly at that time quite male dominated, and then pivoting to a trading floor, I think I certainly put up a very tough exterior. And I also used a lot of humor to try to diffuse situations. Both of those things are not who I am, but I think I probably over-indexed more on that. But also trying to remain very agreeable, because, if you're too tough and you're too domineering, well, then, we all know the word that you get called. So that I think, was something I navigated daily, hourly, earlier in my career. That has changed. And maybe I've changed. I think maybe the industry has changed. But I think a lot of it is with the growth of the number of women in finance. I mean, I actually frequently now find myself waiting in line for the bathroom, which never used to happen. And so that I think, prompts a culture shift. I think also just the concept of people bringing, and look, I think there's a limit to this, bring yourself to work. That means people get to know you on a personal level. It means you're familiar, what's going on in your boss's life, what's going on in your colleague's life, so you can kind of help them manage it. And now as I manage people, I spend quite a bit of my time on that, really just on people management and making sure they have what they need both at work, but also that we know what's going on at home so that we can, manage workload accordingly. And listen, I think the last couple of years, everyone has had some tragedy hit them. And to a person on my team, there have been some real, tough stuff to deal with. And so I think that's just become a much more acceptable and kind of business as usual way of managing people. And as companies are realizing that they've got to work really hard to retain people as well, it's a pretty solid tenet now of how we're running the business.
I wanted to say a couple things. Again, changes that I've noticed at the college. The number of women in STEM discipline classes has risen sharply, and the number of women applying to medical school and applying for other medical careers. So that's very striking to me. That's been a big change at the college. But I'm amazed every time Erin speaks at how parallel our lives have been. I think when you're younger, you don't want to rock the boat. And if people say things in front of you that are offensive, and it does happen, I think sexism is alive and well, you kind of want to fit in. But gradually, as you mature, there are certain things that I just don't like people saying, and I will call them on it. I won't be obnoxious about it, but I will draw their attention to something that they're saying. So, for example, I had a colleague at Ohio State, very affable guy, but he would tell these stories when I was there and in front of other people, and he'd embed in them things like breast jokes, but thinking that he wasn't being offensive because he was talking to another person. It was something that someone else said. But things like that are not unintentional. And I think at some point, you don't want to kind of giggle and say, oh, that's okay. It's really unacceptable. And I think women more and more are being themselves. I see a big difference in my women students in so many ways, in the way that they interact with me and with male students. And I just think that as you mature, you want to be taken seriously. I'm not sure exclamation points in emails are the worst offense I've heard of, but I do think
use a lot of
women
them,
tend to want to be liked, and they want to be perceived as getting along. And I think you can do both. And I think you can also, I consider myself a feminine person. My brother is always saying to me, why do guys like you so much? And I actually think it's because I'm not giggly or any of those other things. I just am myself with people. And I think it's very important to kind of acknowledge your authenticity and be your authentic self with people.
Erin, you talked a little bit about retaining talent and recruiting a little bit. I know that you've been at JPMorgan for about 16 years. Can you talk a little bit about how you identified the culture fit there and what keeps you there?
Great question. Questions about kind of culture at JPMorgan, kind of how I determined if I was going to be the fit or not. My running joke when I'm interviewing people who aren't from JPMorgan is that, Wall Street there's a lot of dogs, and JPMorgan is the golden retriever of the firms of Wall Street. And truly that to me, and kind of a real heavy focus on team culture, was what really attracted me to the firm. It is a place where if you pick up the phone and call someone, they'll pick up the phone and answer. And it's people who genuinely want to help. That's been a consistent theme through my entire time at the firm, on the different teams that I've worked on, and then worked with across the firm. And frankly, so much so that there are a lot of people from Holy Cross at JPMorgan, because I think the themes of, creating community, creating an intellectual space, a lot of those themes translate at, and not to make this a JPMorgan commercial, but to make it a JPMorgan commercial, that's what has kept me there. The teams that I've been on have been incredibly supportive. We've been through a lot. I mean, when I joined, we very quickly went into the financial crisis. We had a lot of disruptions in our business. We sold parts of our business. And so even through all of that disruption, there was a lot of camaraderie, a lot of trust. and a genuine desire to work with one another. I never recognized the caricature of Wall Street at JPMorgan or with any of my colleagues. And so whether, you want to work in finance or whether, you're, trying to discern your next step, later in your career, look, as we all do, that for me is front and center. It's who do I want to work with? Who do I want to surround myself with? I think that is so much more important than the, minutia of your day job. Finding people who are going to inspire you and you can inspire is, I think, one of the critical points to having, a successful career.
I want to get back to what Erin said about success, because I think everybody thinks about success. And what she just said is so important, I think, in terms of your working situation. So it's not just money. It's your relationships with people on your workplace. And that's certainly something that has kept me at Holy Cross. And I think has kept a lot of my colleagues. I mean, a lot of us have been here, close to 30 years, and that may surprise you. And I have colleagues who retired recently who were here almost for 50 years. And it's just because of the great people. And that's a really important part of your working life. I think that it's so satisfying.
And then the final, thing I'll say just on managing your career. I mentor a lot of people across the firm. It's like my half day job. But I always like to say, no one will manage your career like you will. It is nobody else's job to do it. So you've got to prioritize that. And then when you think about your priorities, I joke about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Some of that's going to be salary, some of it's going to be location, some of it's going to be work-life balance. That may change for you at different points in your career, and that's okay. It's just making sure that you know what your North Star is, and that, you are surrounding yourself by people who will help you achieve it. Oh, we've got one more question.
Back.
Perfect.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you got from analyst to where you are today and how you built your leadership and management skills, like within your specific roles.
Oh, great question. How did I get from analyst to where I am today and building leadership, throughout each part of the spectrum of the role? It really is incremental. And I think leadership is a skill set that needs to be curated outside of your day job. And I think JPMorgan actually recognized this, that we had a lot of managers who were very good at what they did. Like, they were great traders. They weren't necessarily great managers or leaders, and management is also not necessarily leadership. So ensuring that we were curating people who were good at managing other people. Some of that is selfish. We know that people don't leave firms, they leave managers. Managers have the ability to impact your day-to-day in a real super positive or super negative way. And so for me, I think it wasn't so different, I think, from what I did at Holy Cross. I think, at the analyst level, it's training the class behind you. It's taking the time out to, teach them the stuff that you just learned, because you're best situated to teach them. You have the context for where they are in their career and how they can grow. And then when you start managing people, I have to be honest, that was a hard transition for me, because you pivot from grinding and, being the person who's doing to being the person who's doing and helping others to do. And that requires prioritization. And I don't think I did a good job prioritizing that, particularly early on. Ensuring that your team knows where they're marching to, why, and they've got the context for how what they do contributes to the end goal. And then also ensuring that they feel heard, that they have the ability to contribute to the team. And so, from that perspective, it's ensuring there's kind of ground up contribution to what it is we're doing, whether that's business planning, whether that's a weekly team meeting, whether that's where, what our team outing is going to be, during our offsite. And that means, a couple of things. It means the onus isn't always on you, top down leader. It's you're leading with, and you're doing so in a transparent, I talk about radical transparency on my team, an authentic way. So, you will not hear me say something different to someone above me, below me. Like you will hear the same thing come from my mouth, because one, it's exhausting to manage, competing messages. And it's, I think it leads to a team that they may not like the answer sometimes. I may not like the answer sometimes, but at least, you're going to hear the truth. And so that's something I think that happened very gradually. And bluntly, I'm still on that learning curve. And it's something I try to work on daily, weekly. And for me, it's, I think self-awareness is so key as a leader, knowing what your biases are and what happens. I'm going to throw some Jesuit or Ignatian spirituality out here. When you're going to your place of desolation, like if I am head down, I am in the zone, I don't want to, deal with anything other than the task in front of me. I know that I have a tendency to do that. So when I see myself doing that, I've got to acknowledge it and pivot. And that, I think, we're all on that journey, and just acknowledging that no one's perfect at it gives you the space to continue to improve.